dependencies changes, our effect will rerun and refetch the data from the server. So now it's time to commit our code to the repository. So here we say filter games by genre. Now, to improve the user experience, we're going to highlight the selected genre. This one is super easy and we can knock it out in a couple of minutes. So we should have the app component pass the selected genre to our genre list, and in this component, when we render the button, we'll set the font weight dynamically. So if you're rendering the selected genre, we make the font bold, otherwise we render it as normal. So here we need to add a new prop called selected genre, which can be a genre object or not. Next, we add it here. And then, when we render the button, we set the font weight to an expression. Here we say the genre that we're rendering. If it has the same ID as the selected genre, .id. Now here we need to use optional chaining because the selected genre can be null. Now if this expression is true, then we'll render the button as bold, otherwise normal. Now we should pass the selected genre to this component. So back in the app component, here we set selected genre to selected genre. Now let's test our application. So I'm going to select indie, adventure, RPG, beautiful. So let's make another commit and say highlight the selected genre. Okay, now we're going to add a drop-down list for selecting platforms. In this video, we just want to focus on rendering this list. We'll implement filtering after, okay? So let's add a new component called platform selector. Now, in this component, we're going to return a menu. Menu is one of the components in Chakra that we can use to render a beautiful drop-down list. Now, this is a composite component, so it has different children. So here, first we should add a menu button. Now, we want to render this as a regular button. Here we can give it a label like platforms. So when the user clicks on this button, the menu opens and then we'll see the items. Now, it's also nice to give this a right icon. Here we're going to use bootstrap chevron down. Okay, so here we have a button. Right after, we add a menu list. And just as a reminder, you don't need to memorize any of this stuff. You can always go back to Chakra's documentation and read about the menu component. Now here inside the menu list, we add one or more menu items. So for this demo, let's add a few items, 2 and 3. Now let's remove React on the top. Now let's test. Test our application up to this point. So we go to our app component and add our platform selector right above our game grid. So platform select. Good. Here's what we get. Beautiful. Now we should render these items dynamically. To do that, we're going to use a different endpoint selector. Good. Here's what we get. Beautiful. Now we should render these items. Remove inside the menu. The list, we add one or more menu items. So for this demo, use platforms. Chevron down. Chalk and full. Now we should render these items dynamically. To do that, we're going to use a different endpoint on ROG API. So let's look at the documentation of ROG API. Here we have an endpoint called platforms. Now, here we have two options. We can get a list of video game platforms or a list of parent platforms. In this case, we're going to get the list of parent platforms, which is shorter and easier to use. So let's see where this endpoint is. So here's the address, /platforms/lists/parents. Now we need to create a hook to fetch data from this endpoint. So back to the project, here in the hooks folder, let's add a new hook called use platforms. Now here first we need to define an interface called platform. Our platform objects have three properties: ID, which is a number, name, which is a string, and slug, which is a string. Now here we define a custom hook called usePlatforms, and here we call useData. As the endpoint, we pass /platforms/lists/parents. We should also add our interface here, platform, good. So our hook is ready. Now we should export it from this module. So look, with this generic hook that we created earlier, now we can easily create custom hooks for fetching all kinds of data. We can do this with very little code. So now let's go back to our platform selector component and use our new hook. So use platforms. We get the data, and then use it to render the menu. Use our new hook. So use platforms. We get the data, and then use it to render the menu items dynamically. So we map each platform to a menu item. Now here we should set the key to platform.id and the label to platform. Name. Let's see if it's working. So back in the browser. All right, we've got the platforms, beautiful. Now, what if an error happens? Well, let's grab the error from our hook. Now, if there is an error, again, I would prefer not to render this component as opposed to throw an error in the face of the user. So if we have an error, we're going to return null. Now to test this, let's go to our custom hook and put an X here. Now we don't get the platforms list. Beautiful. So let's revert this back. We're done with this step, so let's commit our code to the repository. Here I'm going to say build platform selector. Next, we'll implement filtering. Now, let's implement filtering by platform. It's super easy. We'll use the same approach as before. So, here in the app component, we'll declare a state variable for keeping track of the selected platform. When the platform changes, we pass the selected platform to the game grid for filtering. So let's declare another state. It's super easy. We'll use the same approach as before. So here in the app component, we'll declare a state variable for keeping track of the selected platform. When the platform changes, we'll use the same approach. Now, let's implement filtering by platform. It's super easy. We'll use the same approach as before. So here in the app component, we'll declare a state variable for keeping track of the selected platform. When the platform changes, we pass the selected platform to the game grid for filtering. So let's declare another state variable of type platform or null. We initialize this with null and call it selected platform. Good. Now we should go to our platform selector, and when the user selects a platform, we should notify the app component. So let's go to platform selector. Here we need to add a prop called onSelectPlatform. This is going to be a function that takes a platform object of type platform and returns void. Next, let's add it here on select platform. Good. Now, for handling selection, here when we render a menu item, we handle the click event. We set onClick to a function, and here we call onSelection. Here when we render, next let's add right here on select platform. Good. Now, for handling selection, here when we render a menu item, we handle the click event. We set onClick to a function, and here we call onSelectPlatform. And then we pass the current platform that we are rendering. So with this, we notify the app component. Now let's go to the app component and set this prop. And then we pass the current platform that we are rendering. So with this, we notify the app component. Now let's go to the app component and set this prop. So this is where we are rendering a platform selector. Here we set onSelectPlatform to a function that takes a platform object. And here we set the selected platform to this object. Let's see if our application is working. So let's select a platform. Now nothing happens here, but let's open up the DevTools and go to the Components tab. Here's our app. So look, here we have a state variable that is set to PlayStation. Beautiful. So our plumbing is working. Now we need to pass the selected platform to the game grid component. So back to the app component. Here's our game grid. Let's pass the selected platform. Right here. Now we haven't defined this prop yet, so let's go to game grid and add it to our interface. Selected platform. This can be a platform object or no. Now let's import this on the top. Lovely. Now we should pass this to our game's hook. So we add it as a second argument. Selected platform. Now this is where our code starts to. Lovely. Now we should pass this to our game's hook. So we add it as a second argument. Selected platform. Now this is where our code starts to get a little bit smelly, but as always, first we want to make things work. Then we'll come back and refactor our code to make it nice and clean. Now let's add this as a parameter to this hook. So here's our hook. We want to make things work. Then we'll come back and refactor our code to make it nice and clean. Now, let's add this as a parameter to this hook. So here's our hook. We add a second parameter called selected platform, which can be a platform object or not. Next, we should pass it to the API using this parameter object. So we add another property here called platforms. So here's our hook. We add a second parameter called selected platform, which can be a platform object or not. Next, we should pass it to the API using this parameter object. So we add another property here called platforms and set it to selected platform dot ID. Again, we're using optional chaining here because the selected platform can be null. Now we should also add this as a dependency, so when it changes, our effect refetches the data. So here's our dependency array. I'm going to add it here, selected platform.id. Now let me reformat this code. It's starting to look really hard to see. What is going on here? So this is the parameter object that we're sending to the server, and here is our array of dependencies. That's better. Now, hopefully when I save the changes, Prettier is not gonna mess up with my formatting. Let's see what happens. Save. Okay, it changed my formatting, but still, the result is not too bad. Okay. Now let's test our application. So back in the browser, something is wrong. Let's look at the console. Okay, we have an error saying selected platform is not defined. This is happening in game grid on line 14. Right here, because I forgot to grab it from the props. So back in the game grid component, let's add it right here. Good. Now back to the browser. Let's change the platform to Xbox. Okay, we get a different set of games, but it's not clear what platform is selected. So we should render this label dynamically. So back to the app component, we should pass the selected platform to the platform selector component. Selected render this label dynamically. So Xbox Okay, we get a different set of games, but it's not clear what platform is selected. So we should render this label dynamically. So back to the app component, we should pass the selected platform to the platform selector component. Selected platform, we set it to selected platform. Now we should add this prop. So let's go here and add the selected platform, which can be a platform or no. Next, we add it here. And finally, instead of rendering platforms, we're going to render an expression like this. Selected platform.name. Now, because this can be null, we use optional chaining. Now, if selected platform is a valid platform object, we'll render its name. Otherwise, we'll render platforms. Okay, let's see what happens. So Xbox is selected. Now let's change this to Android. Okay, let's build render name. And finally, instead of rendering platforms, we're going to render an expression like this. Selected platform.name. Now, because this can be null, we use optional chaining. Now, if selected platform is a valid platform, change this to a different genre. Lovely. Now let's inspect the network tab to make sure that we are sending the right data to the backend. So here on the network tab, here's our last request. So we're passing two parameters, genres and platforms. So let's make another commit and say, filter games by platform. All right, it's refactoring time. Currently, we've got two state variables here, but as we add more features, we'll need even more variables for tracking things like sort order and search phrases. Adding a bunch of variables here and passing them around is just ugly. It causes clutter in our code and makes it stink. So what can we do here? We should pack related variables inside an object. So here we'll use what we call the query object pattern. So we'll create a query object that contains all the information we need to query the games. With this, our code will be cleaner and easier to understand. So here we're going to define an interface called game query. In this interface, we'll add two properties, genre, which can be a genre object or null, as well as platform, which can be a platform or null. Now, I didn't call these selected genre or selected platform. This is repetitive, okay? Now we're going to replace these two state variables with a state variable of type game query. So let's get rid of these ugly variables. Instead, we create a new variable of type GameQuery. So let's get rid of these ugly variables. Instead, we create a new variable of type GameQuery. We initialize it to an empty object, not null, because we'll always have a query object, but the properties of this object may be null, okay? Now here we have a compilation error saying argument of type whatever is not assignable to parameter of type GameQuery. So the TypeScript compiler doesn't allow us to assign an empty object to a GameQuery object. To get rid of this error, we have to type as GameQuery. Okay? Now we call this variable GameQuery, and the function set GameQuery. Now we have a bunch of errors here. We have to fix them one by one. The first one is here. So instead of passing selected genre, we pass GameQuery.genre. Now, instead of set selected genre, we have to call set GameQuery. Here we should pass a new object. First we spread our GameQuery, and then we add the new genre, like this. Now, similarly, here we should replace selected platform with GameQuery, and then we add the new genre, like this. Now, similarly, here we should replace selected platform with GameQuery.platform. One more here. Here we should replace selected genre with GameQuery.genre, and set selected platform with set GameQuery. Here we pass a new object. With GameQuery.genre, we add the new genre. Like this. Now, similarly, here we should replace selected platform with GameQuery.platform. One more here. Here we should replace selected genre with GameQuery.genre, and set selected platform with set GameQuery. Here we pass a new object. First we spread the existing GameQuery and then add the platform. Okay, I believe there are no other errors here. Now we need to use the same technique in our game grid. So let's go over here. Instead of passing a bunch of variables here, we should pass an object. So let's change the props and add GameQuery of type GameQuery. Now we need to import this, so first we need to export it from our app component. So up here, let's export this interface. Good. Now we import it on the top. Lovely. Next, we remove these ugly properties. And that means over here, we should only grab GameQuery. Now that we have this GameQuery, we can also pass it to our game's hook. So instead of passing multiple, we should only grab GameQuery. Now that we have this GameQuery, we can also pass it to our game's hook. So instead of passing multiple arguments, which is very ugly, we pass a single object that has everything we need. So game query. Now we need to modify this hook. So here we replace these two parameters with game query of type game query. Let's import it. Save the changes. Good. Now this is the only place where we're going to work with individual values. So when calling the server, here we should pass game query dot genre and also game query dot platform. Now for our dependencies array, we don't need to pass individual values. Instead, we can pass our game query object. So anytime this object changes, we need to refetch the data. Now with these changes, we have an issue in our app component. So let's see what's happening. All right. Because we changed the props of game grid, now we don't have selected platform and selected genre. So here we should set game query to game query and then get rid of selected genre. Our code is much cleaner. Now let's test our application. So let's select the genre. Good. Let's also select a platform. Lovely. So let's make a commit and say refactor. Extract a query object. Good. But we'll do the actual sorting in the next video. So let's add a new component called sort selector. Now this component will be very similar to our platform selector. So to save time, let's go to platform selector and grab this return statement. So we copy this and paste it into our new component. Now let's import these components one by one. First we import the menu, then the menu button, as well as the button. Next is BS chevron down, and finally menu list. Now, for the label for now, let's just render something static like order by relevance. And for our menu items, again, let's render something static. So here we need 6 menu items. So let's type menu item times 6. Good. Now we should import this. Now the first one is relevance. The second one is date added. The third one is name. The next one is release date. Then we have popularity. And finally, average rating. Okay, pretty simple. Now let's remove React on the top and use this component in our app component. So we go to the app component and add the sort selector right after the platform selector. So sort select. Good. Now let's see what. What we get are right. Here's our source selector. Lovely. Now we need the platform on the top. The second one is date added. The third one is name. The next one is release date. Padding to line them up properly. So here we have popularity and use this component in our app component. So we go to the app component. All right, here's our source selector. Lovely. Now we need to add a bit of space in between these components. So here we should wrap these two components inside a horizontal stack. So here we bring up the command palette and select wrap, and here we type h stack. Okay, now here we apply a spacing of let's say 5. Okay, that's better. Now our platform selector is not lined up with our first card. So let's apply a left padding to line them up properly. So here we apply padding left to 2. Let's see what we get. All right, that looks better. Now these two selectors are so close to our cards. Let's apply a bottom margin here to separate them. So here we set margin bottom to 5. Okay, here's the end result. It looks great. So let's commit our code to the repository and move on to the next step. So our message here looks better. Now these two selectors are so close. Result, it looks great. So let's commit our code to the repository and move on to the next step. So our message is build sort selector. Now to sort the games, we'll take the same approach as filtering. So when the user selects a sort order, this component notifies the app component. The app component will then pass the new sort order to the game grid. Okay? Now for sorting data, let's look at the documentation of the ROG API. Here we have a query parameter called order to the game grid. Okay? Now for sorting data, let's look at the documentation of the ROG API. Here we have a query parameter called, where is it? Down here, it's ordering. We can set it to one of these values, name, released, added, and so on. Now, if you want to reverse the sort order, we should prefix these values with a hyphen. So back to our sort selector component. Here we should assign each menu item a value and handle its click event. But that's very repetitive because for each menu item, we have to set onClick to a function. And here we should notify the app component. That's very repetitive. So instead, we should store all these sort orders inside an array, and then we'll map each item in the array to a menu item. So up here, let's create an array of sort orders. Each object should have two properties: value, this is the value that we'll send to our backend, and a label. Now let's duplicate this a few times. So what values do we need here? Well, for the first one, for relevance, we don't need any value because that's the default sort order. Then we have data added. For this, we should set the value to added, and we should prefix it with a hyphen because when the user selects this sort order, we want to show the newest games first. So we should reverse the sort order. The next one is name, and for this, the value should be name. Then we have release date. The value should be released with a hyphen, again to show, and for this, the value should be name. Then we have release date. The value should be released with a hyphen, again to show the new releases first. Next, we have popularity. Here, the value should be Metacritic with a hyphen. And finally, average rating, and the value should be hyphen rating. So now that we have this array, we can get rid of all these menu items. Instead, we grab our sort orders and map rating. So now that we have this array, we can get rid of all these menu items. Instead, we grab our sort orders and map each order to a menu item component. Now first we set the key to order.value. Then we set the value to order.value. Value as well. The click event. Now here we should notify the app component or the consumer component. To do that, first we need to add a prop. So here we add an interface called props with a property called onSelect a prop. So here we add an interface called props with a property called onSelect sort order. This is a function that takes the sort order as a string and returns void. Next, we add it here. And finally, here we pass a function and call onSelect sort order and pass order.value. Okay, we're done. Done with this component for now. Now we should go to the app component and add the sort order to our query object. So let's go to the app component. Here's our game query. We add a new property here called sort order of type string. Now down here, we should set onSelect sort order to a function that takes the new sort order that here we call set game query. We pass a new object. First, we spread the existing game query. And then we add the new sort order. So this causes the app component to re-render. Now in the next render, we're going to pass the new game query object to our game grid. So let's go to this component. Now in this component, we get the game query. Everything is in this object. So we don't need to make any changes in this component. So let's go to our game hook. Now when calling the server, we should add a new query parameter called ordering and set it to gameQuery.sortOrder. Again, with this query object, we don't need to add the sort order as yet another dependency here. This is the benefit of encapsulating related values inside an object. Now let's test our application up to this point. So back in the browser, let's sort the games by name. Oops, our application broke. So let's bring up the console. All right, we have an error saying cannot read properties of none. This has happened in image URL on line 4, right here. So some of these games don't have an image. Now we have to handle this case properly, but That's a distraction from what we're currently working on. So I'm going to take a note on a piece of paper so we come back and fix this issue later. For now, as a temporary fix, we should handle the case with null URLs in this function. So let's go to image URL.ts. In this function, first we check if URL is falsy, we're going to return an empty string. That should solve the problem. So back in the browser, let's sort the games by name. Okay, we have different result. So this is an example of a game that doesn't have an image. Now we'll come back and fix this issue later. So apparently sorting is working. Good. Let's inspect. We're going to return an empty string. That should solve the problem. So back in the browser, let's sort the games by name. Okay, we have different result. So this is an example of a game that doesn't have an image. Now we'll come back and fix this issue later. So apparently sorting is working. Good. Let's inspect the network tab to see if we are sending the right data to the ROG API. So let's go to the network tab. Here's the last request. And here's the ordering parameter. Beautiful. What if we select the platform, so we filter by Xbox and change the sort order to release date? Let's inspect the last request. Okay, so here we have two parameters, platforms and ordering. Beautiful. Now, one thing that is currently missing is the current sort order. To render this dynamically, we should have the app component pass the current sort order to this component. So back to our app component, this is where we have our sort selector. Here we should pass the current sort order to this component, which is gameQuery.sort order. Now we should add this prop in this component. So let's go here. We add it to our interface, sort order of type string. Then we add it here. Now, down here, instead of rendering relevance, we should find this sort order with the given value in this array and render its label. So here we declare a constant called current sort order. Here we go with the given, we add it here. Now, down here, instead of rendering relevance, we should find this sort order with the given value in this array and render its label. So here we declare a constant called current sort order. Here we go in sort orders and try to find an object with this value where the value equals sort order prop. Now down here, instead of rendering relevance, we render current sort order, that label. Now, because this can be null, here we have to use optional chaining. If we find this object, we render its label. Otherwise, we render relevance as the default sort order. So initially, we're sorting the games by relevance. Now we can change this to date added. Good. We can change it once as the default sort order. So initially, we're sorting the games by relevance. Now we can change this to date added. Good. We can change it to name. Lovely. So let's make another commit and say sort the games. Now, to handle games without an image, we'll use a default placeholder. So right below this video, you can find a placeholder image. Grab that and add it to the assets folder. Okay, now let's go to image url.ts. Now, because this is a static asset that we're going to deploy with our application, here we cannot type a path like go up to the assets folder and so on. We have to import this image like a module on the top. Asset that we're going to deploy with our application, here we cannot type a path like go up to the assets folder, grab, no, it's our application. So back in the no image.